Hello, and thank you for joining me as I present Riverview Hospital's annual autopsy statistics. The purpose of our video is to explain the difference between gross, net, and adjusted hospital autopsy calculations for the fictional Riverview Hospital. We will be utilizing those formulas in order to calculate these various statistics. All the calculations in this video will be expressed as a percentage and rounded to 2 decimal points. Our presentation is intended for adult learners in an associate level HIT program. Let's consider our learning objectives for today. While there are several different autopsy rate calculations, such as fetal autopsy rates or newborn autopsy rates, today we'll be focusing on how to calculate the gross autopsy rate, the net autopsy rate, and the adjusted hospital autopsy rate. We're also going to be discussing the importance of each of these calculations. So you may be wondering, what exactly is an autopsy? Well, according to the book, Calculating and Reporting Healthcare Statistics, an autopsy is the post-mortem examination of the organs and tissues of a body to determine the cause of death or pathological conditions. The practice of autopsies has contributed to medical science by correlating changes in organs and tissues with the patient's symptoms. The practice of performing autopsies also supports the quality of care provided. An autopsy can be performed on the entire body or just on a particular body organ. Why are we interested in the autopsy rates? Riverview Hospital is undergoing a quality improvement review to assess its autopsy practices over the past year. The hospital administration is concerned about how well they're performing in terms of autopsy rates, and they want to understand the different factors affecting their autopsy performance. The hospital's new quality improvement director has noticed discrepancies between the total number of deaths and the number of autopsies performed. They've also received feedback from the medical staff about the need for better clarity in reporting autopsy rates to improve internal processes and patient care. Let's consider the objective of our calculations. 1. To assess overall autopsy performance. By calculating the gross autopsy rate, the director aims to understand what percentage of inpatient deaths are being investigated through autopsy. This provides a focused view of how often autopsies are performed on patients who die while admitted to the hospital. 2. Evaluate in-hospital autopsy rates. The net autopsy rate will help the director evaluate how effectively the hospital is performing autopsies on patients who died within the hospital, excluding bodies that are unavailable for autopsy due to coroner's cases. And 3. To understand the adjusted autopsy performance. By calculating the adjusted autopsy rate, the director seeks to determine how often autopsies are performed on patients whose bodies are available for autopsy, offering a more accurate indication of the hospital's resources for physician education. Here are our statistics over the last year for Riverview Hospital's autopsies and deaths. First, we'll consider the gross autopsy formula. So this rate is the number of autopsies and inpatient deaths for a period over the number of inpatient deaths for that same period. What does this mean for Riverview Hospital? Well, if you'll recall, there were 425 inpatient deaths over the last year. And of those 425 deaths, 85 patients were autopsied. This gives us a rate of 20%. Why is the gross autopsy rate important? Well, the gross autopsy rate shows the percentage of inpatient deaths that were followed by an autopsy. It only includes patients who died while they were admitted to the hospital. This gives us a focused view of how often the hospital performs autopsies on inpatients specifically, compared to the net autopsy rate, which looks at autopsies on patients who died in the hospital, but excludes certain cases like those that were taken by the coroner. So the net autopsy formula is the total number of autopsies of inpatient deaths for a period over the total inpatient deaths for a period minus the cases that were removed by the coroner or medical examiner. For Riverview Hospital, as you'll recall, there were 85 autopsies on inpatient deaths for the period. The total number of inpatient deaths were 425. However, we are subtracting the 5 cases that were removed by the coroner or medical examiner. One important thing to note is that the net autopsy rate will always be greater than or equal to the gross autopsy rate. In this case, the net autopsy rate is 20.24%. Why is the net autopsy rate important? Well, the net autopsy rate focuses on autopsies that were performed on deaths that occurred within the hospital. This rate helps to gauge how well the hospital is performing in internal investigations, excluding external factors like medical examiners or coroners' cases. This means that the net autopsy rate differs slightly from the formula for gross autopsy rate in that it excludes the bodies that have been removed by the coroner for a forensic autopsy. Because the body has been removed from the hospital, it is not available for autopsy and therefore is not considered in this rate. Lastly, we'll be considering the adjusted hospital autopsy formula. So this formula is the number of hospital autopsies over the number of bodies that are available for autopsy. So here for Riverview Hospital, you'll remember that there were 85 inpatient autopsies plus 10 autopsies on patients that died in the outpatient and ED departments over the number of deaths, which was 425 inpatient deaths and 15 outpatient and ED department deaths. This gives us a calculation of 21.84%. The adjusted hospital autopsy rate focuses on autopsies performed on all bodies that were available for autopsy, including inpatient, outpatient, and emergency department cases. This rate is a more accurate measure of how well a hospital is using its resources for physician education, as it captures a broader range of autopsies. This rate is more helpful for understanding how well the hospital is using its resources for medical education, as it includes more cases than the gross or net rates. So in conclusion, I hope you've learned a lot today. Now you can define what an autopsy is. You can explain the difference between the gross, net, and adjusted hospital rates. And lastly, you can explain why these calculations are so important. Thank you for joining us today.